We've got new events. We've got new clubs. But we got the same old winners. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Deadline September 2024. For our feature story, when most people start playing face-to-face diplomacy, it's not at a convention or a tournament, but instead just by gathering together 7 friends and acquaintances and playing for the sake of playing a board game. We call that a pickup game or a house game, and sometimes that's as far as the activity ever goes. But for a luckier few, that leads to the formation of semi-organized regular series of pickup games, leading to what might be called an actual diplomacy club. In our hobby's history, these clubs have formed the backbone of the wider face-to-face hobby, and they still constitute an extremely important tool today for recruitment and retention of interested hobbyists around the world. Later in the program, we'll talk to an organizer of the most recently formed active club in Sydney, New South Wales, in Australia, about his experiences and his advice to other would-be club starters. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Hobbyists globally are already making plans to attend the 2025 World DipCon, our face-to-face World Championship, which will be held in San Francisco, California, April 4th through 6th. Tournament director Adam Silverman has created a new website with all the latest information about the event, and that link is provided below in the show notes. The highlights include 4 rounds of diplomacy over 3 days, a social activity for those arriving that Thursday night before, and a panel discussion on Friday before round 1, which will include past world champions and other hobby luminaries. The venue will be Hotel Spiro, the site of the 2024 running of World DipCon's host convention, The Whipping. Early bird registration is already open, with the room block for housing opening next month, so it is not too early to finalize your travel arrangements for this blockbuster event. In addition, the 2027 World DipCon location will be decided at the annual hobby meeting to be held between rounds 2 and 3 that Saturday. The 2027 championship will follow the 2026 World DipCon, already scheduled to take place in Athens, Greece. In face-to-face news, congratulations are in order yet again to our friend from Canberra, Jamal Blick-Harley, who won the inaugural running of the Cane Toad Classic Tournament in Brisbane, Queensland. Dominic Stevens from New Zealand took second, with past DB&I champ Peter McNamara coming in third. Congratulations and well done to first-time tournament director Gavin Atkinson, who is one half of the duo that produces the Diplomacy Games podcast, for starting this event. Congratulations are also in order for the winner of the latest stop on the North American tour, which was SkyCon in Montana. And that saw Katie Gray of New Mexico take her second face-to-face title of the year. Matthew Krill of Washington State and local player Aaron Tate came in second and third. Craig Meyer ran the event with his usual aplomb, and you'll hear all about it later in this program when Katie is interviewed as part of our Winner's Circle segment. A link to the DBN coverage of SkyCon, in case you missed it live, is provided below. As far as upcoming face-to-face diplomacy events goes, the Cane Toad Classic was not remotely the last stop of the 2024 Australian Tour. The first ever Asia-Pacific Diplomacy Championship will run this October 12th and 13th in Melbourne, Victoria. And then there's another tournament in Canberra the first weekend of November. A link to their Facebook page and registration form can be found below. A week before the Melbourne event, so October 5th and 6th, sees the return of Weaselmoot, the yearly tournament run by Chicago's diplomacy club, the Windy City Weasels. I've linked their website in the show notes. That same weekend of the Melbourne event will feature the first time a diplomacy event has been held in Germany in quite some time. In this case, the Heckstecken, to be held in Dresden. And yes, of course, I have that site linked for you below as well. And then the weekend after that, we have a completely new entry to the European Tour, the Basque Country Diplomacy Championship Open, to be played in Bilbao, Spain. There will be 2 rounds, a semifinals and a finals. The semi-final rounds will play until 1906, with the finals playing until 1909. To register or to find out more information, contact Egowitz at, and here's the email address, campo_16 at msn.com. And of course, don't forget the Dutch National Championship to be held the same weekend as the Canberra event, November 1st through 3rd. So for that one, I have linked the Facebook page for the European diplomacy fans. And that same weekend in North America, again, November 1st through 3rd, we have the long-running Carnage Diplomacy Tournament hosted by veteran TD David Maletsky. This is truly an amazing time for face-to-face action in the global diplomacy community. Of course, if you can't get in on any of that action, I bet you could squeeze in a game from the comfort of your own home. Yes, folks, I'm talking about online diplomacy tournament or league play, of which opportunities abound both in the extended deadline and virtual face-to-face formats. The 7 Years War League, which is based in Europe, will host its next game day for virtual face-to-face on September 23rd, with English and German language boards starting at 7 p.m. CET, and as a first, a Russian language board starting an hour earlier. Of course, in Australia, Jamal Blakarli is currently leading the European standings, but it ain't over yet. I've linked the standings below. These games are played on the VWDC Discord server, as are other virtual leagues, such as the Virtual Diplomacy League and the Tour of Britain. So use the link below to navigate to those spaces. And then, for extended deadline play, Season 3 of the Olympus main event will be off to the races soon, so join that Discord server to participate. Every month, we like to report on the latest and greatest audio, video, or visual content from creators we call our DBN media partners. I mentioned the Diplomacy Games podcast earlier, so let me refer to them again, since they have released a new episode about the intersection of diplomacy and religious faith, which you should certainly listen to using the link provided below. It is a fascinating and thought-provoking discussion between 4 Australian hobbyists, all of different faith traditions. Florida Man has also released new content, in this case, a pair of videos on his YouTube channel analyzing a recently concluded online game of a popular variant of the day called Imperial Diplomacy, in which he played Portugal and his co-analyst played Japan. That YouTube channel is also linked below. Finally, Ed Sullivan's YouTube channel, which is called The Diplomats, completed its coverage of Season 2 of the Olympus event final by interviewing Olympus founder Nicholas Spencer. So I have included a link to that episode as well. Now go forth and consume more diplomacy content post-haste. As longtime viewers of this program can attest, we try to keep you abreast of how our game of diplomacy is being used in academia and or in scientific research regarding fields such as technology or politics, history, or others. This month, I report to you from the field of communication and technology studies, in which a recent paper was published in the Proceedings of the ACM on Human-Computer Interaction regarding the use of diplomacy to study the theory of social exchange through negotiation. It's authored by scholars at the National University of Singapore, the Indian Institute of Technology, and Carnegie Mellon University. The paper utilizes a data set of over 10,000 chat messages from online dip games to analyze different negotiation styles and strategies, as well as to predict short and long-term game outcomes based upon those strategies. Various conclusions are drawn in the article about the significance of the findings in both the fields of human organizational dynamics as well as computer game design, with suggested additional areas for future research. You can find a link both to the abstract and to the entire article below. Several months ago, I first reported on the advent of a Swedish gunboat tournament, or it's actually a league, as part of the general esports platform called eSparven. Now I hear from them that those zany Swedes are running as a variant to their regular event, something we in the old days used to call a 7x7 gunboat tournament. That's 7 players starting 7 different games at the same time, playing each of the 7 great powers. In the postal phase of the diplomacy hobby, this was a popular way for experienced players in particular to test their mettle in an ultimate tactical exercise. The organizers of this event in Sweden hope eventually to spawn a restart of the Swedish face-to-face scene as well. If you are interested in following the action, you can use the link in the show notes. The latest issue of Stephen Agar's publication, God Save the Zine, hit the hobby's inboxes earlier this month. Just like the zines of old during the postal era, Agar's includes game reports from his running of both classic and variant diplomacy, as well as other games, and also includes articles and a lively letter column with his subscribers, mostly about the history of the British diplomacy hobby. Articles this time include rules and map for the Danelaw diplomacy variant, which is designed to be played between 14 and 17 players, believe it or not, but they can actually accommodate even more. There's also an article about changes to the Veni Vidi Vici variant, which is set during ancient Rome. And there are articles about strategies for the EG alliance to take down France in classic diplomacy, and a series of responses to the following question presented. If you could make one change to diplomacy, what would that be? To access this issue and subscribe to future issues, please use the link provided below. And now, let's feature another discussion with face-to-face organizer in a deadline segment we call Where to Play. Here's my recent discussion about club play with Australian Shane Armstrong. Hello, Shane, and welcome to DBN's Deadline.
Greetings from Sydney. I'm out in the suburbs, so I can't show you any harbour views, but it's an absolute pleasure to be with you.
Great. Well, first off, tell us a little bit about your own diplomacy origin story.
It's a story that's a little longer in the years now than it used to be, but it all started back in the late 90s. I think my friend had this board game he was given when he was probably a little too young for it. He'd never really played it. And he's like, oh, we should play this game one day. And sure enough, we got together and played it, and it was diplomacy. And it had me from the first game. We had 8 people, and I think a few, I am the only one it really stuck with, but there are, I think, 2 or 3 people I could persuade to come along to a game if necessary. But then I hit university, and that was back when play by email was a huge thing. I was a big part of the long past now Cat 23 community, which was a hand adjudicated diplomacy community. That was a while ago.
Shane, that is a blast from the past for some of us to hear that you're a Cat 23 guy. But keep going.
We are still around, a few of us, I think. I've seen David Cohen's name still running around as well. But I've been in and out of the hobby over the years, as one tends to be. Gunboat apps kind of kept me alive a bit in the game when I had young kids, but I've been really back into the face-to-face scene in Australia over the last 9 or 10 months. The way that happened was incredibly serendipitous, actually. I was just having breakfast at a cafe one morning down in Canberra, and I saw a guy with a T-shirt that said diplomacy, and I'm not going to pass up the opportunity to congratulate someone on a great choice of board game. And he said, oh, well, if you're interested in playing, you should talk to my friend who's just coming back now. And turns out that friend was Jamal Blakali, and the man in the T-shirt was Andrew Goff. So a very serendipitous T-shirt wearing on Goffy's part has brought me back to the hobby quite significantly.
So it sounds like a lesson is that we all should be wearing those freaking T-shirts all the time.
Yeah, I still don't have one. I really should get one though, shouldn't I?
I mean, seriously, if Goffy could do it, who can't do it?
Well, well, to be fair, is there anything Goffy can't do? But yeah.
Well, let's definitely not get off on that subject. Let's instead talk about the Sydney Diplomacy Club. How did it start, and how's it going?
Well, it's only just kind of getting started again. There's always been diplomacy players in Sydney, but it's a really challenging city to arrange face-to-face games. It's quite geographically dispersed. It takes a long time to get anywhere. Committing to playing for at least 4 or 5 hours is a really big commitment on a weekend for people in Sydney. I'm currently based in Canberra, but I'm often in Sydney. And having observed the great development in the hobby over the last 9 or 10 months throughout the country, actually, I decided to try and kind of rekindle things in Sydney and get a bit of a scene going for people that's kind of based on the model that we have implemented in Canberra over the last little less than a year. Basically, what we've done is joined a lot of little pieces together that hadn't been joined together before. There was a Facebook group that was fairly dormant. A guy called Bill Hackenbracht had like a face-to-face registry. We kind of dug into that for some names of potential players. I looked through the Discord servers for virtual players who might be based in Sydney. And I also promoted the group that we've started to use the Facebook page to organise, and I promoted that group in store in a bunch of stores in Sydney. We had our first public game in the Sydney CBD last Sunday, and we managed to get 2 boards, which really surpassed my expectations and was a really positive starting point for the hobby in Sydney, I think. And we're still kind of riding off that high and planning for our next event in Sydney.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing for that. If your first attempt to bring up 2 boards, tell us how the 2 boards went, if you don't mind.
So we ran a beginner board, and people got a bit of a feel for the game and a bit more of an understanding of the game. And then we had an intermediate board, which I was playing on the beginner board, so I didn't get to study the intermediate board until a bit later in the day. But we ended up with a 17 center France being stopped from soloing, which was amazing for a first game of a club, I suppose. That was really, really positive to see. And a guy called Yanni did very well there. It was interesting seeing the nervousness on his face as his centre count went up and he was trying to work out how to bring it home to 18, because it's not a position people are into often these days, especially in the face-to-face scene. But it was a great time. It was a great time. People had heaps of fun.
Oh, that sounds just totally exciting. Well, if someone, thinking about organizing a club in their own localities, tell us some of the trials and tribulations that one might experience in doing so.
Yeah, I mean, getting started from nearly zero feels really, really daunting and really difficult. But, even building off a player base of 1 or 2 or 3 players, 7 is such an important number for us as a hobby. I think you've kind of got to really kind of get your numbers and start to work on them. One of the key things, I think, to getting engagement is getting new players along to something that's just starting from scratch, is to really be able to motivate people to attend. You've got to make it easy for them to attend in some ways, and to really make it clear that, the event, they should have confidence in you as an organizer and in the event in general. Like, I think when you can kind of generate that kind of positive feeling and that kind of engagement, and make it clear that this is something that's, vaguely organized and professional and is going to be a good fun time, and you're going to get a board, I think that really, really helps. If the potential players can really kind of build their confidence in both you and the event, it starts to become a little bit easier. And that's when you start to generate a bit of momentum, and then you can kind of hopefully start to build a bit of a critical mass to get your board, and then maybe go that little bit further. I mean, a week out from the game last Sunday, I woke up when I woke up, and my brain first went to thinking, oh my God, I don't have a board for next week. Like, you'll constantly kind of worry about numbers, but you've just got to kind of get what you can and kind of build from there. Like, it will take time, but if you can make things really kind of clear and professional and generate some excitement and generate some buzz, I think you can start to build your board and kind of go from there. I was really, really surprised and glad to get a board on Sunday. I thought it will too. I thought it was going to be 1, and to get 2 was like really magnificent. But I mean, organising both here in Sydney and also helping out organising in Canberra, we're constantly learning new things about what works and helps and that sort of thing. So constantly kind of tweaking the way you'll engage with people.
Well, what's the best advice you could give to someone who has this idea, but doesn't actually know how to start or where to begin, or even what the first step is?
Yeah, well, I've got that kind of goes into 2 areas, right? One is advice on kind of organising as a group, and then also what you kind of would like to try and achieve on game day to make that really positive experience for newer players. With the organisation side of things, I think you really have to unturn like tons of rocks. Just try and think about every possible avenue you've got to find out your potential player base. So that was like what I described earlier, looking at a pre-existing Facebook group that had kind of become dormant, looking at that face-to-face register, looking through trying to encourage virtual players, because that's a big part of the hobby now that's changed a lot. That's I'm still not really properly engaged with yet, but that's been the real growth point in the hobby recently. It's important as well when you're organising to have a really centralised point of organisation for the player base, and sometimes that'll be really organic. For the case of Sydney, that dormant Facebook page we revitalised and have started to use to organise. In Canberra, it's done via a WhatsApp group with about 100 people on it, which is pretty impressive. So you've got to have that one point, but you've also got to cater for the people who might not use Facebook, right? Because I'm not a huge fan of it either, but I'll also have an email thing when if I make a post about an upcoming game or something like that, I'll also email out to the people I know who don't use Facebook, because that just keeps in contact with them. Another important thing to do is like really briefly just follow up with someone when they join the group or they express an interest in the game or in playing. Just, oh, hey, I saw you're interested. It'd be really great to have you. Just make that point of human contact, right? Again, that's about building that kind of contact and that trust and in the event and the group. Kind of gives you that bit more credibility. I mean, realistically speaking, good organisation shouldn't really occupy too much more than 2 or 3 hours a week, and sometimes it's even less when things are set up. But it does take effort, right? It does take some continued effort. You can't just set it and forget it. I think complacency is always going to be the enemy in trying to build a good diplomacy community. It's something we need to really continually think about progressing. Another tip would be to put an effort into making things look well organized. Like there's plenty of graphics out there on the web and within the hobby that can make your online or print outreach look really professional and really well put together, and again inspire that confidence in the casual player. Another thing I did, which I really wasn't sure was going to yield anything, but I did it anyway because my angle was if you don't try, you don't know, is I made a whole bunch of flyers, and when I was up here in Sydney a couple of months ago, I flyered a whole bunch of local game stores, talking to the people in the stores. They were all happy to put the flyer in the shop, advertising the club and trying to draw attention to the fact that diplomacy was kind of starting to build up again. And they were all positive and happy to put it in store for a while. And we did get a few players brought to us through that. So that was really nice to hear that actually made some sort of achievement. The other thing in outreaching to stores is that helped us find a venue that was really keen to host us, which really, really helped as well. Their enthusiasm was a big part of why we hosted there. They were more than happy to host us, and they were actively encouraging us to have the event there. So that was really, really positive. The other thing that I think is really key, and I've observed this in Canberra and Sydney as well, is to have a central, as best as you can do central, public venue for your games. Players are way more comfortable attending an in-store event than going to someone's house. It's just human nature, right? So the objective is really to make it as easy as possible to attend. They know when the event is on. It's very clear. It looks professional. Their people are engaged. They know that it's going to happen. There's going to be a board. These are the important things. You make it really easy to attend. People come. They're just there to play the game. They have a great time. If we're talking about game day, things are a few little bit different things in there that we've really noticed, and this maybe applies a little more to Canberra, where things are going really well at the moment, than Sydney, where we've only had one so far, but we're trying to implement the same model. It's really important, I think, these days especially, to create a really open and inclusive environment that people want to be part of. The player base for diplomacy is far more diverse than it used to be, and we grow the game by recognising and welcoming that fact. We emphasise player safety, fun and competition in that very specific order, because we're trying to build a community as much as play a game, right? The competition comes later. There'll be opportunities for competition if people want to play through tournaments and stuff. The objective in building a club up is to start to build your player base and get people more familiar with the game, and then they'll go on and start playing intermediate and advanced games, and you'll have really high quality games as well as games for people who are still learning. I think an important thing to do is really make sure you support first-time and beginner players. Make sure that they have a really good day, a really good opportunity. That requires any more experienced players who are on a beginner board to give new players a good game, and so they can learn kind of about what a mid-game looks like and feels like, because that's when the fun really starts to kick in with diplomacy, rather than having experienced players just play for their own gratification. Because the only way we grow the hobby is by having new people have a positive experience and want to come back and bring their friends. That's the key to growing the game. And the way we get high quality face-to-face games is for new players to play multiple games and become intermediate and advanced players. And we have really observed that kind of taking off in Canberra over the last year or so. It takes time, but it's super rewarding. Right now in Canberra, we meet once a month at least, but we have a formal once a month game where we get 2 or 3 boards every single time. And we've really built that off this really small community. It continues to expand. There's always new people coming through. It's fantastic. My biggest bit of advice for anyone organising, though, is really sometimes it feels, and it certainly felt this way for me, Canberra was easier because there were other people and we all worked together. Sydney, I've done a good chunk of this on my own. I've had help from other people in bits and pieces, but most of the promotion and everything I've been driving through, it can feel a bit lonely sometimes, but that's kind of natural. Try and reach out to people if you can, or feel free to get in contact with me in one way or another. I'm happy to talk you through what we do and how we do it, if that helps you any. But the key thing is just to really stay positive, right? Because this game is 65 years old, but it's not even thinking about retiring. It's got something special that we all know and love, and that new people constantly discover and enjoy. So my encouragement to anyone wanting to start something up is to just provide the platform for people to fall in love with the game, just the way you did.
Well, we all fell in love with it sometimes. A great idea to get in touch with that and try to recreate it for others. Right.
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, there's been quite the flowering of face-to-face diplomacy in Australia recently. I mean, you mentioned the Canberra Club. I wrote about this in a recent Diplomacy World article because I remember when the Diplomacy Association of Australia and New Zealand had several face-to-face events, had an overall tournament circuit called the Bismarck Cup. So it just warms my heart to see this coming back. So give us your thoughts about the flowering of the Australian hobby.
Honestly, David, it's amazing to see how things have gone over in less than a year, really. As I said before, we've got 2 to 3 boards every single month in Canberra. Australia has hosted 3 tournaments this year. There was the Melbourne Open that was in March that was covered by DBN. We had Canberra had its Hung Parliament Handicap in April, which was also covered by DBN. That was a great tournament for new players and had a handicapping system that encouraged them to play their best games and potentially win them a trophy. And also, from my perspective as a more experienced player, it was actually really nice to start the year with a good warm-up tournament where it wasn't super competitive. We knew the handicapping system was in place and it wasn't going to mean any trophies for more experienced players because we were going to get significantly handicapped. So it was just nice to really play good quality games and to just play for the love of the game, to be honest with you. I thought that was sensational. And in that tournament, we had 4 boards in 3 rounds and 3 boards on the final round, which is an amazing number of people, honestly. It's my understanding that was the biggest tournament in Australia in 20 years. The other thing that happened recently in late August was the inaugural Cane Toad Classic in Brisbane, which I saw has been getting a bit of attention throughout the community. Hopefully that's going to kickstart the scene in Brisbane because there was some really high-quality play that we observed there. More broadly in Australia, the scene right now is really, really supportive. There's close collaboration and organisation and promotion amongst all the kind of major cities and groups where games are being played. Right now, we've got a centralised front door for registration to play face-to-face in Australia. Its primary purpose is to put people in touch with tournament organisers, but you can also be put in touch with game organisers in Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne. So if you go to diplomacygames.com/register and fill out that form, your information will be sent to the right people and they can get back to you with more information. I mean, even taking it further, Australia nearly sent a board of players to World DipCon in Milan and had 2 players on the top board. So we're not just we're matching good numbers with good quality players. The hobby is in a very, very good space at the minute in Australia with plenty of room to grow.
Certainly seems that way from the outside. It does. What's coming up next on the diplomacy circuit in Australia? I think you have something.
We have a few things. Seems like the year's coming to an end pretty quickly, but no, there's still 2 more tournaments to be played in Australia. The Asia Pacific Diplomacy Championships will be held in Melbourne on 12 and 13 October at Fortress in the CBD. That's coming very soon. I haven't sorted my travel or accommodation out yet, so that's a nice reminder. Thank you. I do, yeah. And the Australian Open will be held in Canberra on between 1 and 3 November. My understanding for that one is there'll be 4 boards over 3 days, and there will apparently be a top board on the Sunday, which should make for some really, really high quality play. More broadly, there are regular monthly games in Canberra, like always. I'm certainly hoping to see some games get organised in Brisbane as well, because they had a fantastic environment and vibe up there in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago for the Cane Toad Classic, and they've definitely got a good core player base that they can build from there.
Yes, but is it a pro or a con that you've got Gavin Atkinson and Kaner? Got both of them working. Is that a pro or is that a con?
Kaner and Ambi bring a fantastic vibe, and I tell you what, Gavin did an absolutely magnificent job with the Cane Toad Classic. It was smooth as silk, that tournament. It was lovely, and it was great fun as well.
I have no doubt. I'm just screwing around with them because they've been on the show before. So now I get to screw around with you at future shows as well. So when is your Sydney club doing another game day? Do you know yet?
Oh, you'll have to keep an eye out. I'm still recovering from Sunday, to be honest with you. There was some kind of highs and lows in the week or so leading up, but it was a great success. And as I said before, while the back end of the year tends to fill up pretty quickly, I'll definitely be arranging another game day soon. So if you go to facebook.com/groups/diplomacysyd, that's where you'll find us. There will be another game this year. I can promise you that much.
That's outstanding to hear. Any final thoughts for our Deadline audience? It's been a pleasure to have you on.
It's been a pleasure to be here. This game continues to thrive because of its communities, whether they're local, national, global, or virtual. We play this game because it's fun, right? bring people together to play this game however you're able to. More specifically to Australia, if you'd like to get in touch with a local organizer in Australia, as I said before, diplomacygames.com/register. Or if you're on Facebook, you can go to facebook.com/groups/Australian Diplomacy. Post a message there and someone helpful will put you in touch with the right people. But the hobby is doing, I'm amazed at what virtual has done for the hobby, to be honest with you. I still have not played a game, but that is clearly where there's so much play right now, and that's incredibly impressive and incredibly inspiring, to be honest with you. So I'm really glad to see it.
And you have a league headquartered in Australia now, the Snake Pit, to play virtual games in. So Australia's got everything in the diplomacy smorgasbord these days.
That's very true. The last 2 Snake Pits I couldn't play, and the reason, and this is a good reason, is because on both times I was playing face-to-face diplomacy. That is a sign of a hobby in a good position.
That's actually the only excused absence from playing in diplomacy,
right.
from playing somewhere else. Yeah, Shane, it's been great to have you on the show. We'll invite you back later, and you can tell us how the Sydney Club is going.
Thank you very much, David. It's been great to be with you.
And now let's enjoy the latest installment of our continuing series of interviews with tournament winners. We call it the Winner's Circle. This month, we talked to 2024 DipCon champ Katie Gray, fresh off her win at the SkyCon diplomacy tournament in Bozeman, Montana. Katie, welcome back to Deadline.
Hi, thanks, David. It's always good to be here.
Sure. Always good to have you. All right. For anybody watching this who does not know your diplomacy backstory, there may be somebody. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the game and into the hobby?
Yeah, sure. I started playing on WebDip with a group of friends when I was in grad school. I think that was 2017 or 18. And I played Extended Deadline for 2 or 3 years. Really liked it, but it took up a lot of my time. And when I graduated, I wasn't really able to play Extended Deadline anymore. But that was right around the time when I found the virtual hobby, which sort of kicked off during the pandemic, and played virtually for maybe, I don't know, a few months or a year. I can't remember how much time it was until I played my first face-to-face game. But my first one was Carnage in 2021, I think. And then since then, I've still been playing some virtually, but focusing a bit more on traveling to play face-to-face tournaments.
Well, for someone like you who started in the online space, you sure have found a way to succeed at face-to-face diplomacy. So let's dive right in to your win at SkyCon just a few weeks ago in late August. How did you do it?
So I think it was Brandon Fogel said recently during the Summer Classic DBN broadcast, everybody knows there's no luck in diplomacy, right? That's a thing that's been said throughout history. But there is a lot of fortune, and you can have good fortune. And I like the way he phrased that, because I think you always need that to do well in this game. You know, you have to be fortunate to be next to people you trust, and for people to make the decisions they make. And honestly, I think that was a lot of it. I found allies. There was a new player there named Aaron who I worked with really well. And I was lucky enough to be next to Matt Krill twice. That's always nice. I don't know. I had, it was a really stacked group of people. There was a lot of talent there, but there weren't very many people there. And it was just like a good group of people in terms of skill and also like vibes. They were fun games, and I managed to find allies and keep it lighthearted. And I don't know. That was not really an answer of how I did it, but that's how it felt. That's how it went for me, is, good players, good alliances. And just like it was a fun tournament.
Well, it's as much of an answer as we ever get from anyone on how to win.
Good.
Well, you did mention this already, but SkyCon was smaller, frankly, than the Vancouver DipCon that you won earlier in 2024. So you were facing some of the same players from one round to the next pretty regularly. If you could compare that experience to a bigger event where you're largely seeing different players each round, that would be helpful.
Yeah, it really is different. I mean, there's a lot more chance for things that happen on a board to be influenced by things that happened previously. I was definitely in at least my second or third game where I heard somebody say, we all know they're going to fight early. There's, bad blood from the last game. And I think that actually did come true in the case that I'm thinking of. People really were not ready to trust each other after whatever happened in the previous game. And that's always a risk, but like you say, a lot more of a risk in these smaller tournaments. And then on the other hand, I mentioned Erin before, but I played with her in all 3 games. And so, she was sort of an unknown factor in the first game, but by the time I got to round 3, I'd already played with her twice. I already knew sort of her style and the way that she played. And, especially for a newer player, or at least new to me, that's really helpful. Like you get to learn what people are like before, the final round where it counts. And so, I think there's pluses and minuses for sure. But if it's something that you're thinking about, people like to say that tournaments are a variant on diplomacy, and I think that's kind of true. And in a small tournament, that might be especially true, where you're going to be playing with the same people again.
Yeah, and people who are going to be successful are going to figure out how to adapt to the situation they're in, whether it be small, medium, large, face-to-face, virtual face-to-face. I mean, there's ways to adapt to that, but you're right to point out that the differences they're significant. There can be significant.
It can be, yeah.
Well, putting aside the competition itself for a second, tell our audience what it is like to attend a face-to-face event, particularly SkyCon. What happens off the boards, for example?
I think overall it's tiring. Face-to-face events are tiring, but they're incredibly fun. I think every tournament I've been to has some sort of welcoming dinner or event, at least one. A lot of tournaments will have more than that, depending on the timing of the weekend. At SkyCon, I sat at dinner next to Riaz and Chris Brand, 2 people who I respect a lot. I've gotten along with them really well, but I've never had long conversations with either of them. And it was just really cool to like learn a lot more about, their stories and them. And, meeting the local players is always really fun. I love playing diplomacy with new players. I think we'll get to that later, but yeah, I think like going and traveling to a tournament, it's really worth it, not for the games itself, but for the rest of it. At SkyCon, we had a lot of people playing board games between rounds, and afterwards people play Terraforming Mars and other strategy games. There's a lot of like social deduction games. Secret Hitler, we played a lot at SkyCon. It was really fun. And yeah, I think this is true of most of the hobby in general, but at SkyCon in particular, it was just a really fun group of people, and it was nice to be able to have all that time off the board. At SkyCon, I think almost every game was done by like 1905 or something. So there was probably more time off the board in SkyCon than most others that I've been to. But yeah, it's really a lot of fun. And it's not just about the diplomacy, which is good, because it would be really hard to continue traveling if it were only about the diplomacy games, because they're not always going to go well.
Well, they're not, and you come for the game, but you stay for the people. Is what we've often said about the hobby in general. If there's anybody out there that's apprehensive about playing face-to-face in an event like this or any other kind of face-to-face event, what would you want to say to such people? There may be some listening.
I guess I would question why you're apprehensive. If it's just the unknown of playing in person, it made me really nervous. I felt like I was going to be sick before my very first game face-to-face. And then it's fine. Things are not going to go well, and it's fine. And things are going to go well, and that's obviously better than fine. But if it's just like nerves, I would really say try to push past that, because especially if you're thinking about going, you probably already know the game of diplomacy, and there are differences in different mediums, but it's still the same game. You still have the same objectives, and you could still, I don't know, you can push past that first like unknown territory, and it might take a while. I mean, it took me some time to like have any success in face-to-face, but I kept going because it was fun, and eventually it paid off. So I don't know, really just do it. I don't know what to say besides trust me. I think I've said this on every sort of post-tournament interview. Like, I really like it. If you can manage to go, do it. It's really fun. It's worth it.
Well, you mentioned your first event and feelings apprehensive about it, all that. I seem to remember a certain someone back at that 2021 DipCon who in Vermont who was actually struggling with the whole writing the orders thing. I mean, I remember this. I don't remember who that was.
I could say it certainly wasn't me who was turkey in my very first game.
No, it couldn't have been you. That I was watching over your shoulder and taking video or whatever I was doing.
But yeah, my first game I was Turkey, and in the spring of '01, I moved my fleet to Khan, and in the spring of '02, I ordered it to Bulgaria and didn't specify a coast, and I didn't get my 2 builds, and it's like, great, that's how we're starting. So
Yes,
there is some catch up.
I thought I remembered something like that. All right, now you have an event coming up later this month as well in September called the Diplomacy Masters, taking place in Las Vegas. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's September 23rd through 25th. It's part of the World Series of Board Gaming, and I believe it's the first time Diplomacy has been a part of that event, which is very cool. Hoping it'll bring even more publicity and stuff to this game that we all love. But yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. The games are there's one game a day from I think 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. So it's going to be there's a lot of time for playing other board games if you want to be part of the World Series board games in general, or of exploring Las Vegas if that's more your thing. Yeah, I think I'm really excited and not nervous, but like I'm curious because I think it's going to be quite different from the NADF events that I've been to. So I'm really interested to see how it'll play out.
Well, one difference is probably going to be you'll be competing with a different group of players, at least to a large degree than you have before. Any strategies about how you will deal with that kind of situation?
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to the most. Like I said, I really like playing with new players. So I think it'll be really fun to sort of have a largely clean slate going in. I think everybody who plays in a close-knit hobby has a reputation after, it can only take one game to get a reputation, but, people have expectations on how I play and how everybody plays, but it'll be really interesting to go into a game and see that if that's not the case, right? I think people, for the most part, probably think that if I'm working with them, they can trust me and I'm going to be a fairly decent ally. I hope that's what people think. I think that's what people think. But people won't think that in Vegas if they don't know me. And so it'll be totally new. It'll be very much like I'll have to figure out what people are looking for, try to just, like you said, adapt to that situation where, I just will have to figure out like what people want from me and from the game and try to make that happen in a way that makes them want to work with me. And I think my gameplay is not going to change though. Like, I don't think I'm going to be able to go and be like, oh, I don't have to be an alliance player or whatever, but like, I could just go and be ruthless. I don't think that's going to happen just because that's not how I play. It would be fun. I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, I seem to remember you have thought about or even
Wait, sorry. I don't know if you can see me, but you froze. So
yeah, the whole thing went out there for a minute. They can edit
okay.
that later. So let me just go on to my next question.
Okay.
In 3, 2. Well, I seem to remember that there was a time that you did try to change your game style a little bit, at least for a top board situation, and you really didn't like doing it, as I recall.
Yeah, I did not have fun. I was stressed the whole time. I didn't play well. It didn't work for me. So yeah.
Well, you've already mentioned that playing with newer players, you consider that really fun. Do you think that's easier or harder than playing with folks you already know?
I do think it's harder. It's harder. You go in with less information. And it can be tough to decide, would I rather play with a player I know or a new player, but it's harder. You have less information for sure. I mean, but if you're playing with players, that doesn't mean they're not going to do things that surprise you. Every game, people do things that surprise you, no matter how much you think you know them and how much you've seen them play before. So, it's definitely not that I'm more comfortable playing with players I know, but you at least sort of think you know more about it, even if you don't.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, there's a dichotomy in the hobby, or has been in the past, of I would say the sort of the top players. Some of them prefer to work with experienced players on a board. Some of them prefer to work with newer players. Where do you fall in that continuum?
I'm sorry, because this is a non-answer, but it really depends. I think probably like 90% of what goes into me picking who I want to work with is vibes. It's not about how good a player is, or it is about if I think I can trust them, but But even more than that, it's about like, would we get along? Would we have an alliance where we can communicate? Would we be able to, like, literally, would we have fun talking? I mean, I think that that's like really important. And I played in the Summer Classic maybe a month or two ago now, and I played with a lot of new players who I hadn't played with before. And I think purely chose alliances based on vibes. Like, this person and I got along really well in the first 30 seconds we talk. Like, I'm probably going to work with them. And I think that that's, yeah. So it really depends for me. I mean, you can't necessarily tell by just talking to someone how experienced they are, how, like, are they going to make tactical mistakes? Are they going to be tactically brilliant? You don't know if they're going to lie to you or stab you. You don't know that about people either. But what you do know, or at least what I know, I think pretty early on, is would I get along with this person and would I enjoy working with them? And I think that's really, for me, what it's about more than sort of the other things.
How dare you prioritize having a good time or having fun
in this board game?
What kind of competitive streak is that? I'd like to know.
Well, I like to say that now, but then when we're playing games, okay.
Yeah, it is easy to say now. Well, you've had significant success both in face-to-face and in virtual, because you've won a virtual tournament in the past. So for those watching who are face-to-face veterans but have not yet tried the plunge or taken the plunge into the virtual tournament or one of the virtual leagues we've got out there, why should they hop in?
For me, like, the best thing about virtual is that it's really low commitment. I mean, unless you live in a place that has a strong local hobby where you can play a weekly game or you can get your friends to just play with you, that's not the case for me. So the only option I have of just playing a game of diplomacy without traveling, without playing extended deadline where it takes months sometimes, virtual is the only option for that. And there's a really solid group of virtual players right now. Like I said, I played Summer Classic, but I haven't been playing Virtual Diplomacy League or anything like that really this year besides Summer Classic. And so there were a lot of players who are new to me, but the skill level is quite high. I mean, there are good players playing. You can get really solid games out of Virtual Diplomacy. And I mean, you can brush up on your tactics before a big tournament, or you could just say, I missed this game. I want to play once this weekend and, not make my whole, weekend about it. Like, I think it's really accessible, and you get to play with people from around the world. I would love to travel to Australia and play in that hobby. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but I can at least play with the players through virtual, and I think that's really cool.
That is cool, actually, that you can play with people from all over. Do you think it takes a different skill set to succeed in virtual face-to-face versus physical face-to-face?
I don't really think so. I know that there's a debate about this, and people talk about being able to see body language. For me, I think you can sort of still tell when you're listening to people through voice chat. Like, you can still at least get a sense of, are they being shifty or whatever. Maybe it's not as easy, but I think the same skill set applies really to virtual and face-to-face. I don't find it to be that different. I think they are quite different from extended deadline. I was watching Jordan Connor's interview with you on the last deadline, and he said something about he's not going to get outworked in extended deadline. And that was my same experience with it. Like I said, I put a lot of time into those, and I think that's why I was successful, because if you can put a time into it, like, you have an advantage. And I think that's different. And you can have different strategies because you can talk with people across the board and stuff. And I haven't been able to really make that work in face-to-face. So I think extended deadline is quite different from the other two, but I really don't think there's a big difference between face-to-face and virtual face-to-face.
Well, that's probably good to know for those that are, experienced in one and would like to try the other. There's no reason not to, right?
No reason not to.
Well, I was lucky enough to attend an event with you back in July, the Regatta tournament in Boulder, Colorado. And in there, I gave a little speech about different diplomacy play styles. Since then, I've been asking guests here on Deadline to talk about one aspect of that, which is alliance play. So first of all, tell me what the term alliance player means to you, because people have different definitions.
People have very different definitions, and people run alliances very differently. I think for me, they're sort of like the tier 1 kind of alliance that everyone wants, or well, that I want every game. I don't think everyone wants this, but I really like an alliance where I can basically go to the other person and I can say, let's be colorblind. Your pieces are my pieces. And, it doesn't, like I know their moves, they know my moves. We're not really worried about, okay, you're right next to my home center. Are you going to walk in? It's more about your piece is closer to the line, or you should get the center because we can only guarantee it by you taking it, even if it puts me 2 behind, or vice versa. I really think that kind of cooperation is like the peak. It's really hard to get, though. I think a lot of people aren't willing to be that trusting for, maybe good reasons. Maybe people shouldn't always be that trusting, but I think that's the most fun way to play. I think what happens more often for me is really being in an alliance means you're not fighting each other. And I know that's really obvious, but it doesn't just mean like, oh, I won't fight you because you've been good to me. It also means I'll go fight you because I can make progress somewhere else. And so one of the things that's really important for me in my alliances is to try to make sure that that person can make progress somewhere else. Because if they're not, if they're not making progress in Italy and I'm England and they're France, like they're probably going to come north at some point, right? Like people aren't just going to stagnate and do nothing for the most part. So I think it's really about like just trying to send their units away from you in any way you can. And I think the easiest way to do that is to make it appealing to do that. So,
let me tell something on myself here. When we started the virtual world, during the pandemic, and we had a lot more analysis and a lot more commentators talking about various things, it really struck me how many people who alliance play meant to them work with this ally, but also make sure I diplomatically work with their enemies to slow them down. I'm like, people do that in alliance. I've been playing the game for decades and I had never played that way. I didn't even realize that people thought about alliance play as some kind of balance of power thing where you're trying to actually slow down the progress of your alliance partner. And I'm thinking, I've never heard of, literally never heard of such a thing, but it's very, very common, which is not what you just described. So why do you think that is common?
It is common. I've seen it before a lot. I tend not to do it because I don't have time for that. I don't know where people get all the time to be convincing people to do stuff that's not directly related to what they're doing. But I think it's because even if you're in an alliance, for the most part, at the end of the day, you do want more centers than your ally. You probably do want to top the board, or you do want, depending on scoring system, you do want to be in a stronger position. And sometimes it's not necessarily about that. It's just about you don't want your ally to have a big stab opportunity on you. Maybe I want to be in a position where if we fought, I have the upper hand, not because I want to fight you and have the upper hand, but just as sort of a defense mechanism or defense, like a deterrent. And I think some people will do what you just said because of that. They don't want their ally getting 2 centers and them getting none and leaving them open for a stab. And I think that that's valid and I think that's fair. And if it happens a lot. When I find my ally is sort of working against me in the back channels, I don't get I'm not too upset about it. I sort of expect it. But I actually don't think, depending on how long the game might go and all those kinds of things, I don't think in general it's what I want. I want my ally making progress somewhere else because I want them to continue pushing units that way and not coming after me.
That answer clarifies some things for me because it may very well just be that when I was playing a lot of games, we did not use scoring systems where topping the board even mattered that much. So that was really just not a thing. At the very least, it was a small tiebreaker between draw results. So maybe that's the reason, is that now the topping the board has become sort of the goal. It really changes some of the dynamics within an alliance, or can change them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people see topping the board as winning the game. And so I think people will try to play for that, even while they are, even though they're never going to attack their ally, maybe they still want to do whatever they can to come out on top.
Well, and to be fair to them, under many scoring systems currently in use, that is, quote, winning the game in a way that is not really going to happen with a solo victory. Well, you were present for the speech, and you know that I talked about 5 different categories or potential categories of play styles. I talked about alliance play and also balance of power and transactional players. and unconventional players and reactive players. So what did you think about that? Did that make any sense to you, or did you think I was missing an alliance style that you think we ought to talk about?
No, I think that made sense. And I think one thing you said that I fully agree with was that people do not fit individually into one of these kinds of play. Most people will play some combination of them, depending on the circumstances, which I agree with. I mean, yeah, I think people can't be pigeonholed into one thing or the other, but I think that does broadly sort of describe the way of playing. I also liked your unconventional as just meaning like chaos players, because we all know some of those chaos players. I think some of them, diplomatic way of you to put it.
Well, but some of them can be very successful, actually.
Yeah.
It just depends on, as you said earlier, a lot depends on the situation that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think people should determine what is best for them in terms of play style? I mean, when you're learning the game, you might be tempted to emulate Katie Gray or emulate somebody else, that you think that you've heard talk about how they play. Well, I'll play that way too. And, and does that always work? Is that a way to do it? Or is there some other way that one should try to figure out what play style works for them, you think?
I think it's a good place to start if you're just learning. I mean, I remember when I was just learning the game, when I sort of transitioned from playing with my friends to playing in open games on WebDip. Yeah, I read a lot of articles. I think Brother Board had a bunch that came out around that time. Actually, WebDip was doing this School of War thing where Jordan was one of the people teaching it. And I can't remember who else. I think it was like JMO. I don't know. But there was basically like a teaching game going on. And there were like these professors who would comment on the game on the forum and sort of say what they thought about it. And I think like learning from different perspectives is very important, especially when you're just starting out. You don't know what to do. You don't know what's going on. You've got to start somewhere. But I think that you should remember to take all those things with a grain of salt, because the best way to play is the way that is most natural for you and the way that you have the most fun and the way that you feel the most comfortable. And we talked about playing in a way that you don't like already. And really, like, if you try something out like that and it's not for you, that's okay. Like, you don't have to play the way that other successful people do to be successful. So I think trying to find a variety of sources is important, but I think sticking to whatever feels best, I think really that's the way to go, because you're never going to play, like, I'm never going to play David Hood's game as well as David Hood's going to play. And I think that's basically true for everyone. You got to play the way that you are sort of meant to play.
Well, that's right. And it's just a question of finding out what that is, or determining what you were meant to be.
Yeah.
But, I tell this to young lawyers all the time. A way to learn how to do things is to go watch other people do it. You go to court, you go early or you stay late and you watch other people do motions, and you learn what to do and sometimes what not to do by watching other people. And you can be told by me or somebody else how to do things, but really just going and doing it yourself and then watching other people do it. There's no substitute for that, right?
Yeah. And certainly no substitute for trying it out and doing it yourself.
Yeah. And doing it with a variety of people in a variety of different formats if you can.
Yeah.
Because that gives you the most possibility of finding useful information. All right, let's talk about this style of play question one more time, which is this. Can you think of an example of somebody who plays a style different from yours that you have faced and you think is really, really good at it? I mean, gosh, I enjoyed watching that person play that way, even though that's not the way I would play.
Yeah, a lot of names swirled around with this question, right? And I kept coming back to one, and I've talked about him before, and it's Nicolas Tallier. That man, I think he plays a combination of sort of balance of power, sort of transactional. I'm not saying he can't be a good ally, so don't come after me, Nicolas. But I have never seen him in a super strong game-long alliance. They're never going to fight. They're really doing what's best for the two of them. I have never seen him play that way. What I tend to see is he basically gets along with everyone around him. He makes very convincing arguments to get little things at a time. So he'll be like, okay, let's DMZ here instead of bouncing, and you support me in here, and you do this. And they tend to be, I think, shorter deals, at least in games I've played with him, and when I know sort of what he's negotiating. Smaller things that sort of the whole result is that his position just increases and gets better and better. And that does not to say I've never gotten along with him on games. I certainly have. But it's always been a trust but verify, mostly verify. And I really think he's just very good at seeing the whole picture and getting little things here and there that really add up. He's very good at it.
That's an interesting choice. This actually doesn't apply to Nikolai's situation because he is not a face-to-face player, but European face-to-face players who have played on that circuit tend to be very transactional because all their games end in 1907 or earlier by design. The scoring system is designed that way. And so the idea of having a game-long alliance just literally doesn't compute to them. Yeah. I remember the first time I had some of those players come over and play in my tournament, they were just fish out of water. They couldn't understand what was happening because there were people pitching things to them that didn't make any sense under the scenario in which they had played. It's an example of how playing under different formats with different groups of people in different venues can really make you sort of a one trick pony, as opposed to what we were talking about earlier. When you play with a lot of different people in a lot of different formats, it can really make you. I'm not being critical at all. I mean, I think some of the players I'm talking about are some of the best players I've ever seen, but they just weren't they weren't used to playing in that particular style, and it affected their play style.
Right.
Any final thoughts for our deadline audience, Katie? It's been a pleasure to have you back on.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure for me as well, David. No, I don't have any final thoughts. I've said this 10 million times, and I'll keep saying it until I get sick of this hobby and stop playing, which I don't know. I'd like to be Eddie Brisson. I'll be traveling in 50 years from now or whatever. But I think if you can come to face-to-face games, if you're lucky enough to live somewhere where there is a local hobby, start there. Really reach out and I think every diplomacy player that I've ever met wants more people in the hobby. People will be welcoming and hopefully will be nice on the board. Maybe not, but they probably will be nice off the board. So I really can't recommend it enough. And like David said, if you've been playing extended deadline, try a new format. If you've only been playing face-to-face, maybe try a new format. The more people play in diplomacy, the better, to be honest, from my perspective.
That's a very good sentiment, Katie. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, David.
Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit our website, www.diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.